Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Elementary Dear Data, which is episode 3 of season 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the episode Elementary Dear Data. So Elementary Dear Data is the episode in which Data and LaForge go to the holodeck to do a Sherlock Holmes type adventure. However, Data figures everything out before it even starts because he read and has memorized every single work of Sherlock Holmes. So Pulaski challenges Data, saying that because he's an android, he would not be able to solve a real-life Holmes mystery had he not already read the novels, knew what was going to happen. So they go on the holodeck to test this challenge, and LaForge asks the computer to create a adversary capable of defeating Data, but unbeknownst to them, they actually create a sentient hologram, Moriarty, who at first does create a mystery that confounds Data. However, eventually Moriarty, having gained consciousness, grows beyond the simple program of Moriarty and wants to live and takes the whole ship hostage, and Pulaski hostage in particular, and Picard has to negotiate with him where Moriarty just wants to be alive and wants to leave the holodeck, but when Picard explains that leaving the holodeck is impossible, Moriarty releases Pulaski and his control of the ship and tells Picard that his life is in his hands, perhaps it always was, and Picard says that he will not kill him. Instead, he will save him in the computer banks, that hopefully one day they will have the capabilities of of letting him leave the holodeck. So, one thing I think I will say up front, because if you're familiar with my channel, my videos, I usually at the end of the video I'll do Patreon comments where Patreon supporters can leave comments for an episode that I will read in this episode. And I will say up front that my Patreon supporters like this episode a lot more than I do. I was never a fan of this episode. I mean, it kind of intrigued me more of wanting to see Moriarty return. And in fact, I first saw this episode before the sequel where Moriarty did return, Chip in a Bottle, was released or was made. So I thought this would be a thread that they would never follow up on. And I was very, very excited just when I saw the trailer for Chip in a Bottle and they were actually bringing Moriarty back, because this I thought was a loose thread that felt unfinished to me. But the episode itself, I never really cared for. I never really been a fan of these holodeck adventures. There's always been just an excuse so they could have our TNG cast or Star Trek cast, whatever the show may be, go back into earlier Earth or human history and do a period piece instead of a future, a future sci-fi show. And I never really liked that, because I don't watch Star Trek for the past. I watch it for the future, and it just seemed like an indulgence that the writers had, and a lot of people do enjoy that, to be fair. I'm just never been one of them, and I've never been a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes. And I'm trying to think that the only, I don't think I've ever watched or read any of the stuff from from this time period that was made up in the 80s. I had seen the newer stuff they did, the Guy Ritchie things with Robert Downey Jr., the movies, which were average. And my favorite was probably the Benedict Cumberbatch newer ones, which were also, I think, kind of average, not that great. So I've never really been into Sherlock Holmes, even though he has been a very prominent part of literature and referenced a lot and influenced a lot of modern day storytelling. But I mean, that's not really why I didn't like this episode, or it's mainly having to do with the fact that the episode felt incomplete to me, that it's focused on, it started with this really good premise of can Data solve a mystery, but then it promptly abandoned that thread to focus on a sentient being whose creation I find, let's just say, dubious at best. And it felt like it didn't really live up to the promise of the first part of the episode, which I actually did find interesting. So, and I feel like this is my complaint about a lot of these holodeck episodes. So far, I only covered The Big Goodbye, but I mean, I might have covered some other ones that I haven't gotten to yet in this rewatch, because I have covered future episodes before. But common complaint in my that I seem to have with these holodeck episodes is, a lot of the times, and this is a cliche I covered in The Big Goodbye and many other things, a lot of times a holodeck will malfunction, the safeties will go off, and there'll be a threat of a week. And my complaint that I always have, and this is also true of the episode A Fistful of Datas, is that the episode would have been better off had there been no threat of the week. Had there been no malfunction, had there been no something gone wrong, how the holodeck safeties don't even need to go off. If you just did an episode focused on the holodeck adventure that they set out to do and made it a character piece instead of having to have a threat of a week, then I would have liked it a lot more. And I think that is very true for this episode, that had they, instead of veering off to create a sentient Moriarty, had they focused on the bet that Data and Pulaski had, and had Data try to come up with solve an actual mystery that the computer would create that he wouldn't really know the specifics of. Like, I think LaForge's command of create an adversary capable of defeating Data kind of came out of nowhere, because that didn't seem like the right command to do, because the problem with Data is that he read all the novels, and when they told the computer to create an original Sherlock Holmes program, it just combined two different novels, and of course Data recognized elements from both novels. So the command should have been something more along the lines of asking the computer to create an original work, not based off of the works of was Sir Arthur, what's it, Shannon Conan Doyle, whatever it is the author is, and maybe to draw from other fictional works that Data hasn't read, but do it in the style of Sherlock Holmes. That should have been the command. To ask the computer to create an adversary capable of defeating Data doesn't seem to me to address what the issue had been so far. And so I think this would have been a more interesting episode had they stayed focused on can Data solve a mystery, and then they could have toyed with that. They could have and of course it would end with Data showing Pulaski what's what, and they could have explored their characters more. They could have explored Data's characters more. They could have redeemed Pulaski, oh my god, by actually having her acknowledge Data's sentient, and they could have explored LaForge characters more, and I think that would have been a more interesting episode. And now here's the thing, I do like the character of Moriarty. Mainly, Ship in the Bottle is one of my favorite TNG episodes, but not this. And I like the aspect, when I first saw this episode, as I said, the thing that grabbed me the most was the aspect of Moriarty, of being a sentient being and wanting to live, because they left it kind of in a cliffhanger. They didn't resolve the storyline. So I do think that is an interesting aspect, but I think the way that it was executed here was not done particularly well. Yes, indeed. Yes, I know. So anyway, yeah, and so mainly because the story felt like two halves, like shoved together, that didn't really have to do anything, because Moriarty wasn't introduced. I didn't look at the exact timestamp, but it was like almost halfway through the episode where they first introduced Moriarty. But he didn't become like a main factor in the story until halfway through the episode. And so the episode pivots from being about Data trying to solve a mystery, and can he really? And it completely abandons that storyline and then pivots to be about, oh, there's a sentient holodeck character who's taking over the Enterprise and he just wants to be alive. To me, these are two different things, and the story does not flow well. Just because they're in Sherlock Holmes' era the whole time doesn't mean that it's consistent, because what the story's actually about, forgetting about aesthetics, is two totally different things. And so that's why this episode never worked for me. And I feel like both storylines feel incomplete, not just the one with Data, but also the one with Moriarty, because as I said, that was an issue I had, that it kind of just ended really, like, I think anticlimactic is the word. Like, Moriarty has Pulaski hostage. He's able to shape the ship. He has control of the ship. He's threatening to do damage to the ship. And Picard goes down to talk to him. And what the conversation eventually amounts to is Moriarty going, okay, you're right, I give up. Here, you can do whatever you want with me. And Picard's like, oh, we're just going to save your program. And that's it. And that feels very anticlimactic to me and very unresolved. And that is actually because it's an interesting concept, which is why I wanted a follow-up to it. And we got like an amazing follow-up to it. So don't get me wrong, I'm glad this episode exists, because without it, we wouldn't have the more awesome ship in the bottle. But the episode on its own merits to me, just serves as a jumping off point for a better episode. That the episode itself is inconsistent and not good, but it introduces a good concept that is later put to better use. So learning recently about the specifics of the creation of this episode makes a lot of sense to me. So originally it was written as a script that one of the writers described as taking up 2 episodes in order to film, so it had to be greatly condensed into one episode. And then Maurice Hurley, the showrunner for season 2, was on the record saying that a lot of the earlier episodes of season 2 suffered greatly because of the writer's strike, mainly because they didn't have the time required to put in the effort to tighten the script. And I think that absolutely shows with the script, that it wasn't really, that they didn't have time to tighten it. I think, and it kind of makes sense that it was a lot longer script and they reduced it to a smaller script, and I don't think they did a particularly good job. I think they needed more drafts in order to make it flow correctly. And I think the problem is, as I said, is that there's 2 different stories here, and they're not taking the time to focus on either of them, so they do neither of them well. That was like what Chief O'Brien said that his mother said about talking and eating. If you try to talk and eat, you will do neither of them very well. But anyway, I think this is definitely a reoccurring theme that we will see throughout season 2, is that a lot of the scripts were not written very well because they didn't have enough time to flesh them out, and a lot of them seem like earlier good drafts, because guess what? A lot of them were. Now, another thing I want to talk about, which is very interesting, I just learned about, is apparently, on top of the fact that the script didn't have enough time, also the shooting of this episode was reduced from 8 days to 7 days. Like, the producers decided to take an entire shooting day out of what, the schedule just to save money. It was like, oh, this is going to save us a shit ton of money if we reduce the day. But the director apparently was irate. He was angry. He described this as one of the worst directing experiences that he had. And he did like the end result, and he did speak well. He liked Brent Spiner's performance in this episode, and he did speak well of the end result. But he said it was a terrible experience because you can't just take a day out of the schedule because there's all the story and stuff that they needed to film. And so they had to seriously cut back on the types of shots and the types of stuff that they wanted to do and reduce it to a simple format 1-2 shots in order to make up for that lost day. And so that hurt the production of the episode as well. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is that I just learned was apparently there was an alternate ending to this episode where apparently it was known that Moriarty could in fact leave the holodeck. That earlier in this episode, you see Data, Moriarty hands Data a piece of paper with a drawing of the Enterprise, and Data walks out of the holodeck, shows it to Geordi. But this is the piece of paper generated on the holodeck, so how is it able to leave the holodeck? And so this alternate ending, which actually I just read the script for, is there's just a slight little scene added at the end to make it different, is that because they knew that piece of paper left the holodeck, they realized that because of something to do with the Moriarty messing with the program or his interference, that he would be able to leave the holodeck too. And they also talked about how, because Picard even mentioned, and this has survived to the finish, the final script that we see in the finished episode, Picard mentions that the holodeck is similar to another piece of technology called the transporter, where it takes energy into matter. And so the thinking is that this somehow, because of Moriarty screwing with the holodeck, allowed him to sort of transfer this energy into actual matter in the same manner that the transporter would. And so he could in fact leave the holodeck, but Picard lied to him. So the ending conversation with Moriarty played out exactly the same, where Picard's like, you can't leave the holodeck, you're going to die if you do, and he agrees to be saved. What's added was after Moriarty was saved, they explained to Pulaski, who wasn't aware of this, that they actually lied to Moriarty, that Moriarty could in fact leave the holodeck, and they didn't want him to, and Picard explained it was because, he was a devious character, that he was created after this villain, and he already caused havoc on the Enterprise, and he did not want to let him loose on the Enterprise, and so instead lied to him, saying that he could not leave. Now, Maurice Hurley was a huge fan of this ending, and Gene Roddenberry overrode him and said, no, I don't like this ending. Picard is too deceitful. This is out of character for Picard. He's not this type of character. And Maurice Hurley fought back but lost the fight, and they ended up taking that out. And it's interesting because I talk a lot about Roddenberry, and I'll talk a bit more about him as we go, because there's quotes of other people working on the show saying that he's a terrible writer. And I talked a lot about him when I did my revisited for the movies, how he was actively trying to interfere with the movies, and that he's not really a good writer, and he just loves to rewrite people. But the thing is I understand a writer's frustration from working with Roddenberry like that, and a lot of people, and I have more stories about how some people just outright quit because they couldn't deal with him constantly being rewritten. But the thing is, when I learn about specific examples of what Roddenberry did to change the script, what his rewrites were, not always, but sometimes, I agree with Roddenberry. And I think sometimes this does come from a place of understanding Star Trek more. I think the best example of this is Sitting on the Edge of Forever, where Harlan Ellison was being a big dick over the fact that they changed the script. But I think what the changes they made to a script made the story way better and made sense for Star Trek, whereas the original script made zero sense for Star Trek and wouldn't work as a Star Trek episode, so it needed to be changed. In this case is another case where I absolutely agree with Roddenberry, that I think that original idea was stupid. I'm sorry, no other way of saying that. That was dumb. That, first of all, just because a piece of paper left the holodeck doesn't automatically mean a living being would be able to leave the holodeck and be alive. A piece of paper is not alive. There's a huge difference between a piece of paper. So in that original draft, it seems like Picard and Data are making a wild assumption based off of no facts that may or may not be true. But of course, the writer is telling you it's true. But yeah, that actually makes no sense. And secondly, yeah, I kind of agree with Roddenberry that it makes Picard too deceitful, too much of a dick to be like, oh, well, he was a villain, so I didn't want to let him go. Even though Moriarty made very clear that he's moved beyond the villainous form, and he was having a very genuine conversation with Picard about wanting to live. And instead, for Picard to be like, nah, fuck him, he's a villain, that is dumb. That is a cheat on Picard's character. So I'm actually very glad that Roddenberry was changed the script, and it does make me wonder, had Roddenberry still been around? Because a lot of people criticize Roddenberry, including myself, for putting his box and constraining writers, and this is why a lot of writers hated working on the show. But it does make me wonder, had he still been around in later seasons, would they have been better? Would he have been able to save some other episodes that didn't work, like he saved this one? I don't know, but yeah, so I think Roddenberry good, Roddenberry bad is too simplistic. I think it's more complex than that. Because it's still, of course, not a good atmosphere, the atmosphere he created with writers, which I'll get to more, but sometimes like this, he was actually right to make changes. But anyway, that creates a flaw with this episode, because they kept in the part where Data kept out the piece of paper, but unlike the original script, they don't reference it again. And so some people have pointed out that is a flaw, like how was he able to take this paper out of the holodeck? Now, a fan-splaining explanation I've heard from this that I actually think makes a lot of sense is that there was some sort of replicator technology involved, that the holodeck automatically, for some reason, whatever reason, used the replicator to create a piece of paper that was actually a physical piece of paper that was able to leave the holodeck and not just a projection. But a replicator can do that absolutely to an inanimate object, but not to a living being like Moriarty. So again, this is where I would say the flaw in that original script is Picard automatically assuming that a living being would be able to leave the holodeck and be alive just because an inanimate object left it. I think that's faulty logic. And I didn't really have that big of an issue with the piece of paper leaving the holodeck either. I didn't notice it until other people pointed out. I was like, oh well. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Another flaw, actually, that I myself have noticed that I actually do think is a bigger deal in this episode is when LaForge calls for the Arch, and we see Moriarty notice this. And he lights up, and he's like, and they play this dark music, like, dun, dun. He's like, ooh, what is that? What is that dark fellow there calling for the Arch? What's going on here? And by saying that, it sounds a bit racist, but by saying that, he's pointing out that he sees him as LaForge and not as Watson, which is different how the holodeck characters are supposed to operate. So what's the flaw in this scene? This all happens before LaForge says his thing to the computer to create an adversary capable of defeating Data, which they clearly established, very firmly established. This is what gave Moriarty sentience. This is what created a sentient being. And so before LaForge said this, Moriarty was just a normal hologram. Therefore, he should not notice the arch. He should not notice that Watson looks different. He should not notice anything. He should be oblivious to this, just like all the other holograms are. So that, I think, is a much bigger flaw, and I've heard people try to twist their heads around to make up fan-splaining explanations for this, and these, I think, are weak. I can't even remember what they are because they're so damn weak. There is no explanation. This is a giant plot hole that cannot be plugged, plain and simple. And also, and if I'm going to be a bit more nitpicky here, when Moriarty's talking to this woman and he points out the arch and he shows it to her and the arch disappears and she's like, oh my god, this is dark magic. I'm being a bit nitpicky here. She does not have sentience. So therefore, when Moriarty points out the arch to her, she should see nothing. And her reaction should be, what are you talking about? There's nothing there. Because that's how holograms are designed to be. Just because another sentient being points it out doesn't mean they'd notice. They still wouldn't notice it. But anyway, some people might think that's a bit nitpicky. But yeah. So, and also, I gotta get to the heart of the matter of the issue that I have with this episode. I'm sorry, I just don't buy the concept of the holodeck, the computer, creating life by accident just because LaForge spoke the words wrong. I think that's stupid. I'm sorry. I do. And it's like, at the end of the episode, LaForge is like, oh my god, I feel so terrible. All this stuff could happen just because I spoke in my words wrong. And I'm thinking to myself, this shouldn't happen though. Like, the computer should not wildly misinterpret someone's command like this. If this does happen, that means the computer was very poorly designed and has a major flaw that needs to be fixed, which I don't buy, by the way. So I think that so I don't buy this whole thing. I think it's bullshit. I think it's absolute bullshit that they created a sentient life just because LaForge said create an adversary capable of defeating Data. You can create an adversary because their logic here when they were reasoning this out is, the only way to create an adversary capable of defeating Data is they have to be alive because Data is alive, which is bullshit. When I play chess against a computer adversary and the computer beats me, is that computer alive? When I'm playing all these other video games on my phone and I have a computer point and the computer beats me, is that computer alive? No, it's fucking not. You can clearly create an artificial intelligence that is not alive, that isn't really an AI like the stuff we have nowadays that we call AI. That's not really AI. You can create an interactive program that can defeat you, especially in a game, which is what they're playing. They're playing a mystery game. I have freaking mystery games on my phone. My adversary is not alive. That is programmed perhaps by living beings that could defeat you by not being alive. So this is total BS to me. The whole way they created Moriarty is BS. And as I said, I love what they did with this character in the future, so I wouldn't change it for the world. I mean, Ship in the Bottle is a way superior episode to this one. Even if this episode played out the way I wanted it to play out, Ship in the Bottle would still be a way superior episode to this one. So I wouldn't change that for a world, but I do think they ruined the episode by pivoting to sentient being with a BS explanation to how that sentient being came to exist. They should have stayed focused on Data solving a mystery and had it interesting. As I said, they could have redeemed Pulaski. They could have redeemed Pulaski in this episode by having her acknowledge Data sentient, by having her realize that he's worth something, but instead they did this BS plot of her getting kidnapped by a sentient hologram, which is amounted to nothing, which they did not spend enough time on to really justify. So, I'm sorry. I see this episode as a failure. There's one other point I wanted to bring up. And this may seem, again, like nitpicking, but whatever. I want to ask a question. And it's a loaded question because I already know the answer. But let me ask the question. What difference do you think it makes to point out that the holodeck safeties were not malfunctioning? Like, what... How does that affect the story? How does that affect the characters? How does that affect the plot? How does that affect what is going on? And as I said, it's a loaded question because the answer is it doesn't. Only slightly. The only small, tiny little difference is that it creates tension, which is a bullshit explanation, which I see as a lot of flaws in a lot of Star Trek episodes because the writers want to create tension, so they create this whatever it is, and this happens a lot with holodecks, as I said, one of my major complaints. But it doesn't change anything. Like, Picard goes and talks to Moriarty, and Moriarty's shaking the ship. That's what's putting them in danger. The fact that the holodeck safeties are malfunctioning is irrelevant to that. It doesn't need to be malfunctioning. Moriarty has control of the ship. It doesn't matter what the only difference that makes is, Pulaski's life is now in danger, or we could be killed as well. But none of that happens. We know that Pulaski's not in danger, that Moriarty is actually a good guy and giving her tea and crumpets. So it's fake stakes. It is the very definition of fake stakes. Now, you had that one scene with the robber who goes to rob Picard, and Data grabs his hand and he goes, "Stop it, you're hitting me!" That scene was meant to illustrate that the safeties are off. But do we need that scene? Answer is no. We do not need that scene. That is completely pointless. The only point that scene serves is to illustrate that the holodeck safeties are malfunctioning, and the fact that the holodeck safeties are malfunctioning is completely irrelevant. It adds absolutely nothing to the story. Zero, zip, zilch. And this gets into my larger complaint that I talked about more in my review of The Big Goodbye, is that holodeck safety should not malfunction. In fact, they should not exist. There should be nothing to malfunction. It should be a built-in aspect of the holodeck that it could cause no harm to you. It should be an aspect of it. It shouldn't be a program that can malfunction. That is total and complete bullshit. The holodeck is akin to an entertainment system. An entertainment system should not be able to kill you. Period. We're playing Super Mario Brothers. It shouldn't be a possibility for the mushroom to come and kill me in real life. So that's one of my biggest complaints about all these trapped in the holodeck episodes, and so this one could have been easily avoided because it doesn't even need to be there. We don't need to create tension, any more tension of saying, Pulaski's life is in danger, Picard could be killed. That adds nothing to the story. Nothing. Anyway, that pisses me off a bit, as you can tell. Now, I already did my review for Ship in a Bottle, and I will cover that more when I get to do my revisited for it in Season 6. And I do love that episode a lot, and I love Moriarty. But that episode basically does what this episode didn't do. It focuses more on, it's because that fake ending that they were going to do where Moriarty could leave the holodeck, they toy with that. And in fact, in that episode, they explain why it's not possible, why it's whoever wrote this original draft didn't understand the complexities of the transporter, saying, oh, they can just transport the energy into matter. But in Ship in the Bottle, they made it clear that it was way more complex than that you can't. And so they try using the transporter to beam out the holodeck, things, and it doesn't work. And it's just a much better episode. Also, what I kept thinking about this from a retrospective perspective after seeing all of the Star Trek that came after is the hollow emitter. That if Moriarty just waited long enough, they actually, granted the hollow emitter was a 32nd century technology, so they are breaking the timeline by having it, but in canon, the Doctor brought it back with him from the Alpha Quadrant, or from the Delta Quadrant, and so after Voyager returned, the hollow emitter, which he still wears, could be a Rotary technology. In fact, I always thought of toyed with the fan fiction story about Moriarty returning and tricking, realizing that he's been tricked by Picard to be stuck in that box, and then finding a way out and using tricking the Doctor to steal his hollow emitter so he could go out and be fancy free and want to get his revenge on Picard for tricking him, being like a con type thing. Not that Star Trek doesn't have enough of those already. I think that would be interesting, but instead we just got a nostalgia callback to Moriarty in Picard Season 3. Now, a lot of people had issues with the Moriarty callback in Picard Season 3. My only issue was with the trailer, because the trailer had this, oh my god, it's Moriarty, has the big ending thing, but it turned out just to be something in Data's memory. Wasn't actually that big of a deal. So I thought the trailer was a huge misdirect. But without the trailer, with just the episode itself, I didn't mind it at all. It didn't seem like member berries to me. It felt like it was a good callback because it was about Data creating all this stuff because his consciousness was controlled as a security program. So it was creating images that Data would be familiar with, such as Moriarty. And for me, that made perfect sense. To me, the way bigger issue with the pointless member berry was showing all the ship museums and, oh, here's that ship from Star Trek 4 and here's the Enterprise XO and here's the blah 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 blah. That was just pointless member berry bullshit that bothered me way more than Moriarty. I was actually perfectly fine with him having Moriarty in there, just don't put him in a trailer like that. The trailer totally suggests he would be like a major villain, but it was just like a slight callback in Data's memory, which, come on, don't do that. Anyway, getting off topic now. So I would like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It helps the channel to keep going. So just wanted to give a quick shout out to those that support me on Patreon. We have Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Megalacio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neil Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments for this episode. First comment is from Greg Marley, who says, what an outstanding episode that still is. As fun and thought-provoking as it was when it first aired. Daniel Davis has got to be the highest quality and most effective guest star on any Star Trek series. So many lines delivered with such elegance and feeling, even though he's nominally a villain. I still can't believe he's from Arkansas. It was so deserved that this episode got the rarest of TNG things, a follow-up and a subsequent season. The actor's from Arkansas? Now, the only reason I am surprised by that is because he was also on The Nanny, where he also had a British accent. I suppose the the casting people from The Nanny probably saw him from here, and it's like, oh, that guy can do a British accent good, so let's hire him. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, the introduction of perhaps the most famous sentient hologram outside the EMH, sorry, Pally, Moriarty. We only got to experience the actual one twice. The less than can be said for the deceptive trailer for Picard Season 3, the better. But this character was definitely intriguing. Questions about what happened to objects in the holodeck aside, i.e. the pencil diagram of the ship from Moriarty, this story works great. And little did we know we had an even better sequel coming our way. Loved the beginning establishment of Geordi and Data using the holodeck for off time, though. I'll give it a 9 arches and crumpets out of 10. Wow. A 9. Yeah. As I said, some people seem to like this episode a lot more than I did. So anyway, next comment is from Allison Fordyce, who says, I'm just going to say Pulaski sucks. She's so tedious as a character, and she felt shoehorned into a holodeck adventure. And that's what I'm saying, that if they would have just dropped the whole sentient hologram thing, they could have used this time to redeem her character. Instead, as is, I totally agree with Allison. It's that she feels shoehorned in and that she sucks. And she's a tedious character. It's just, I don't know. I just think it's bad writing, in my humble opinion. Anyway, my rating for Elementary Dear Data out of 10 is going to be a 5 average. I told you my rating would be a lot lower than my Patreon supporters. As I said, like, this was an interesting concept, but in execution, I think it fails. I think it was a script that was not put together very well, that was rushed. That needed more time. I think, and as much as I love the character of Moriarty, and I love the concept of a sentient hologram, that if they wanted to do a sentient hologram better, they could have done it differently, like a different episode, in a much better way than simply LaForge accidentally saying, create an adversary to defeat Data. I don't buy that for a second. I think that's nonsense. And I think this episode would have been way better if they just didn't have that. Don't have the thread of the week. Why can't you do a holodeck episode if you want to, have an excuse to go explore, early history and have the main cast member dress up in period pieces? Then do that. Focus on that. Focus on the original premise of this episode, which more than half of this episode focused on and just abandoned about, can Data solve a mystery? Is Pulaski going to earn respect from Data when she actually does? Is there going to be character growth? But instead we just abandon all of that for this sentient hologram storyline, which honestly they did not flesh out or do justice to either. We had to wait 4 seasons for them to create a whole other episodes for them to actually do that storyline justice, where this one just felt incomplete and unsatisfying. So, yeah, I'm a lot harsher on this episode. Before, and to be honest, my opinion of this episode actually went up, because I used to give this episode a 3. So I did learn to appreciate more of some of the subtle nuances of this episode, like a lot of moments I do like, where, with Data pretending to be Holmes, and that the ending is intriguing, as I said, because it held my interest and made me want a return of Moriarty. So this episode actually does do something right. It does do some things right, but I think overall the script was not that good. Anyway, that is it for my review of Elementary Dear Data. I shall be back for more Star Trek Next Generation reviews. Let me just check the old schedule here to see what is coming up next. So let's see. Thursday will be my review for Star Trek Lower Decks Season 4 as a whole. Saturday will be my review for Loki Season 2 as a whole. And then next Monday, I shall return with another TNG review for the Outrageous Okana. God damn it. And then Wednesday after that, I will be back with another TNG review for Loud as a Whisper. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with that and many, many more videos I'll be doing. And thanks a lot for watching.